the idea of an authentic theme park, and there are really three goals in this talk. The first goal is to consider the implications of authenticity and the theme park and theme spaces. And to be clear, a theme space is any space, and I thought your answers were excellent, that has any kind of thematic import to it. So it could be your backyard, it could be your favorite cafe in Paris, it could be a theme park, it could be a themed retail establishment, as John mentioned with the Dr. Martens store and so forth. So any of those are certainly theme spaces, and then theme parks are sort of a subset of theme spaces. So we'll talk about the implications with this relationship of theme spaces and authenticity. The second aspect, which I think is equally interesting, is how does authenticity relate to popular culture? So if you hear news stories about the presidential candidates and they talk about, I'm the authentic American and so forth, you get a sense of how authenticity plays a role in our political life, in our cultural life, and our social life. And then lastly, develop ideas for a conceptual theme park, and that's really the subject of the worksheet that I gave to you. Again, you don't have to turn this in, but this is more to ruminate and think about some ideas of authenticity. And even if you get beyond theme parks and theme spaces, I think it's a worthy, certainly philosophical or cultural consideration. Some background, I worked years ago, you can't see this, this is the front gate of Six Flags Astroworld in Houston, Texas. When I was a graduate student, I was a trainer at a theme park, so that was really my impetus to get involved in this and kind of get what we call in anthropology the emic or insider's perspective of culture, and trying to understand things from the perspective of people on the ground who experience these things. And you might see that that's relevant to considerations of authenticity, because we're often, as I'll talk about later, getting into the realm of subjectivity and how can we even decide what is authentic in our world today when we have so many memes or units of information that are flooding our consciousness and really saturating our consciousness with ideals or values that maybe we wouldn't be so happy to instill in ourselves. So this is where I started off as far as my background in theme spaces. So I start with the front gate here as a metaphor, and I'll take you through 10 sort of considerations of authenticity. The front gate, for anyone who works in a theme park, is the first place that you see as a guest. You walk into the front gate. If it doesn't look great, your first impression is rather negative, and it's also the last place that you see when you exit. And as a trainer at Six Flags Astroworld, we stressed this, and we said, it's the most important place because the guest has the first contact with you and the last contact with you. And certainly as we talked about authenticity in our training programs, we instilled the idea that it's important to try to make sure that guests see that you really enjoy your job, you're playing the appropriate themes, and so forth. The first impression then here at the front gate is just what happens if you get on Google, and I know many of you have your cell phones and you could do this later, your mobile apps, and if you just typed in an image search, and you may not see all these, but I just typed in authenticity, and these are the first couple pages that you see. A lot of certification comes up, sort of as an ideal here, a metaphor. We see that people want to make sure if they're buying something, it's authentic, right? If I buy a diamond ring or I buy some famous piece of art and it's a copy, it's a fake, that's really going to upset me as a buyer. So it's interesting to see that on the Google search. There's also sort of little jokes. You can't see some of these here, but they're jokes about the self and authenticity, which we'll talk about today. The self-help movement has had a big impact, I think, on our notions of authenticity. Again, you see more certifications here. This is just to get sort of first impressions. Actually, some of the books I'll be talking about, some of the sources come up here. And you see some images of Mitt Romney, so clearly, and I didn't click on those, but I would guess that there are questions about, well, who's the most authentic candidate, right? This often comes up when we're going to the polls and so forth, the notion of the authentic American, the authentic candidate, and so forth. So I just take you through these images here rather quickly, and I'll go to my next impression of the front gate. And this is an ad here. If you can't see this, I'll describe this to you. This was in an architectural magazine years ago. And Prada, produces fine handbags and expensive fashion items and so forth. And this particular ad, I think, is quite fascinating. Maybe the most amazing ad I've ever seen. It's an image, perhaps in New York City. If you've been to New York, have any of you encountered people selling black market goods? Knockoff bags and so forth. Some of us maybe have bought some of these. I remember years ago I bought a Swiss Army watch for $2, and it literally a week later stopped working. But what I think is amazing about this ad is it's an image then of one of these salespersons, perhaps in New York City, clearly selling the knockoff Prada bags. And why I think this is so amazing is it's Prada having this moment of reflexivity, basically saying, we know that we're so good that people want to knock us off. People want to copy us. And when I saw this, I was really amazed, and it said a lot about, if you're interested in Baudrillard, as I know some of you are, you could certainly look at this ad and think about Baudrillard's concepts of simulation, the simulacrum, and of course originality as it relates to this. That's my second impression. The third one is just to give you a few definitions, and these may agree with your notions of authenticity. If you look it up etymologically or just hear a Webster search, the idea of authenticity is anything that's worthy of conforming to or based on certain facts, conforming to an original, as I just mentioned, made or done in the way of an original, not false or imitation. I think this is a key one when we get to theme parks, because clearly every theme space, I would argue, has a form of imitation inherent in it. So how do we handle that as we talk about this later? And then lastly, which is very important, I think, to the self-help movement, true to one's own personality, spirit, or character. So these are some initial impressions on the definitions of authenticity. This is an image here. If you can't see this, we have two people doing an Arthurian reconstruction outside of a Pizza Hut restaurant. And this was from a conference I attended 3 years ago in Germany on theming and historical reconstruction. And during one of the presentations, this image was shown, and I was fascinated with it because the individual who's a specialist in doing these reconstructions, these historical reconstructions throughout the UK, offered this as a concept of an inauthentic reconstruction. He said basically you can't produce a space in this manner because the guests will never be able to get in that perspective of getting inside the characters, understanding the characters, appreciating the reconstruction, because it's done, you know, outside their space of Pizza Hut and all these sort of mundane spaces of everyday life. So I found that fascinating when we got into our, you know, academic and professional discussions about authentic spaces. This is just if you look, this is the U.S. A U.S. patent actually on a phrase, and it says authenticity is everything. And it says here it was trademarked by a clothing and outerwear manufacturer, and this is basically a phrase then that's been trademarked. And one of the things to emphasize today is that authenticity, not just as a phrase or a word, but as a concept that permeates our everyday lives, is something that sells millions, perhaps billions of dollars if you think about the stakes of the commodity side of authenticity. My sixth impression goes back to my days at Astroworld, and this is a ride that was called the Mayan Mindbender, and I'll mention to you later, I'll talk about later how the theme park closed a number of years ago, but when this ride opened, it was re-themed, and initially this ride was taken from another theme park and then given this Mayan theme, and one of the anecdotes I talk about in my dissertation on this subject, and also in the book Theme Park, is a manager came to me and he was really expressing some concern and just said, you know, I can't believe what happened with the Mayan Mindbender. And I said, oh, what are you talking about? And he said, well, they got the glyphs wrong. The Mayan glyphs aren't really Mayan, and a lot of the other symbols and the architecture really doesn't match, isn't authentic, right? It doesn't match Mayan culture. So he went to some upper management and offered this critique, and no one seemed very concerned, and they sort of said, you know, why are you so upset about this? What's the big deal kind of thing? Guests aren't going to notice the difference. And maybe that's true, and that's something to think about. If you go to Paris, Las Vegas, right, and it doesn't look exactly like Paris, or there are some glaring omissions or things added that are clear simulations, maybe for the guests they don't mind, because for them authentic at that moment will relate more to the consumer space, the entertainment space, and not that reflection to, oh, this is taking me to Mayan culture, and it's a projection backwards in time, and it's a projection to another time and space. So it's something else to consider here at the front gate. Another aspect of the copy we can think about is, this is happening throughout a number of Asian cultures, is these counterfeit Mac stores popping up. And they're quite popular now. They have, you know, the Apple logos, and they look like, you know, the Apple store with the Genius Bar and all this, but they're not authentic. And of course, as a company, the concern would be, you know, they're using the name to make money off of our products and off of our value system, and they're not having to pay for it. So again, the commodity side of authenticity. The eighth impression, have any of you seen the documentary Darkhan, the documentary film? I really recommend it. It's on this reconstructed, it's basically, it's called a LARP, and that stands for live action role-playing game. So in Darkhan, the individuals take on characters. They build here fortresses. You can see a castle, and they engage in battle with actually sort of Nerf weapons. They actually cast spells. So mages or necromancers will throw sort of chalk-filled balls, and if it lands and hits you with the chalk, you know, it knocks you out. Well, what was interesting to me about this film Darkon was the sense that authenticity came to play on the behaviors of the individuals. And this is where I am right now with my research, is trying to think about the more subjective or emic level, as anthropologists talk about, issues of authenticity. And what happens in this game is, in some cases, someone takes a hit, and like in the case of Civil War Reconstruction, if you get hit, it's your decision whether you fall down and act injured or act dead. Clearly, you're not really being hurt or injured in this case, but it's your decision. And for some gamers in these LARPs like Darkon, their concern is that people are basically, blowing off the hits with this rhino hiding, or using the details of the game to win, or metagaming, which refers to using non-game elements to have a strategic advantage in this theme space. So it brings up questions of authenticity relative to the actor who's involved in the space, and whether he or she decides to play dead or act dead or whatever. And it's actually a contested issue in these cases, and also in the world of historical reconstruction with Civil War reenactments. This is a bit of the side of the authenticity issue that comes into play with people looking to change themselves. This was a psychology article years ago that said, a sense of authenticity is one of our deepest psychological needs, and people are more hungry for it than ever. And they make a point that finding your true self is not for the faint of heart. Are you up to living an authentic life? It's such a great challenge, right? And here are some of the tips that they suggest, and here are 8 acts of authenticity. So we can write these. I'm not saying you should write these down, right? Because maybe we don't agree with these. The first is to read novels. The second is to meditate. These are good, right? These are good things people probably do in Marin. Well, there's a lot of meditation around here, right? Be deliberate. Okay, be deliberate in your actions, but not too deliberate. Cultivate solitude. I have no problem with this one, right? So read, and John and Janika reading there, if you read your existentialist philosophers, right, you can really cultivate some of this solitude. Stay connected. That's important, right? So stay connected to your community, to your value centers. Play hard. Whether it's taking an art class or playing basketball, you should play hard. Be willing to lose. So these are some tips, and some of these relate. You can't see all these sources. Actually, every one of these is on the back of your handout, and I'll be talking about a few of these. These are sort of the last source texts here I'll mention as far as the front gate. Well, let me jump to some theme lands, and theme lands are the places in a theme park that typically give you the sense of being in another place. So if you go to Disney World, it could be a sense of Main Street, USA. It could be a sense of the Old West. The sky's the limit as far as the types of theme spaces that are available. When we think about theme spaces as theme lands, we often consider some of these in this word cloud, some of these words. So the idea of something being accurate or genuine or credible, true, original, and so forth. These are kind of the buzzwords that we think about, both, I think, when we enter a theme space and then more specifically when we're talking here in our case about what authenticity is. I'll read these through. I know the text is small, but these are, I wanted to point out then as part of this conceptual theme land, what are some of the criticisms that people have of authenticity relative to theme parks. So I'll just kind of go through these. First of these I mentioned, if you study Baudrillard, or certainly Walter Benjamin, his great piece, The Work of Art in the Age of Its Mechanical Reproducibility, he talks about the idea of the loss of the aura, the loss of the essence of an art object, and once you photograph that, and even later, if we get into Baudrillard's era, if you photocopy something, you're losing a sense of the aura, the essence, the authenticity of that original. The inauthentic self, and very recently, I was reading, some of you may have looked at Charles Taylor's interesting book, The Ethics of Authenticity. It's kind of a short read, a good one, I think, that covers a lot of these concepts. And he talks about in there, relative to Rousseau's work, the idea of the inauthentic self. And as Taylor puts this, he says, the idea of self-determining freedom is, I am free when I decide for myself what concerns me, rather than being shaped by external influence. I am realizing a potentiality that is properly my own. And so my question to all of you today, I think relative to the theme spaces, is this possible if you go to Disneyland? Can you have an authentic experience in terms of your ontology? And I'll talk a little bit later about how consumer theory addresses this issue directly. So it's something to consider. The idea of originality, revolting against convention. It seems to me if you go to many theme spaces, you're a part of convention. You're buying, convention is being bought and sold in these places. And it seems to me that authenticity then could be problematic if you consider the fact that everything around you, your consumer landscape, is somewhat conventional. Horizons of significance, also from Taylor's work, and this is the idea that if we're going to achieve our sense of self, our authenticity in the world, we project our sense of being, our sense of self onto bigger things. So if I'm an artist, clearly I want to think about the art world outside my narrow confines. I want to think about aesthetic theory. I want to think about Picasso or whatever great artist inspires me. And the question for me to you on Theme Spaces is that sort of conceptualization possible? Can you achieve these horizons of significance relative to yourself in a theme park or theme space? The inauthentic nature of consumerism, if you've read Marx or any of the Frankfurt School thinkers, Adorno, Horkheimer, Marcuse, and so forth, they would get into this issue that even if things appear to be original, even if I go to the Build-A-Bear workshop and I'm making my own authentic bear that fits my personality or my child's personality, I am still being duped, according to the Frankfurt School. And this is, of course, what Adorno said about jazz music. He said it about horoscope columns in his wonderful book, The Stars Down to Earth. He says, it has the appearance that we're being creative and we're achieving sort of an authentic concept of self, when in fact, we're being duped by the consumer industry, the culture industry. And then lastly, this is kind of from the work of dramaturgy and the sociologist Irving Goffman. The notion of the inauthentic or inauthenticity comes from, I might think that I am authentic, but really I'm being duped again by the culture industry, or I'm actually duping others. There's a lot of con artists in today's world where they say, hey, I have this great deal, right? You get an email, they say, I'm an heir to a certain fortune. And it seems to me if you believe that that was authentic, that could cost you quite a bit of money. And probably also cost you your pride as well. So these are some of the main criticisms we can think, and sort of